You ever sit in traffic at the end of the day, engine idling, watching the same red light hang there a little too long, and suddenly it hits you? Nothing really changed today, not in any way that matters. You moved, sure. You answered emails, took calls, maybe even checked off a list that looked impressive on paper. But deep down, there's this quiet, stubborn feeling that you just spent another 12 hours running a race on a treadmill that isn't even plugged in. And the strange part is, nobody around you seems to question it. The guy in the car next to you is tapping his steering wheel like he's late for something important. The woman behind you is juggling a phone call and a half-eaten sandwich, like urgency itself is a badge of honor. Everyone looks busy, everyone looks committed, and yet, if you could freeze that moment and ask each of them, are you actually getting closer to the life you want? Most of them wouldn't answer right away. Not because they don't know, but because they do. They just don't like the answer. See, we've built this quiet agreement with ourselves and with each other, that movement equals progress. That if you fill your hours, if you stay tired enough, if you keep your calendar packed and your notifications loud, then you must be doing something right. It's a comforting lie. It lets you go to sleep at night without asking harder questions. But the truth is a little less polite. Being busy is one of the easiest ways to avoid being effective. It's camouflage. You can hide inside it for years, and a lot of people do. They wake up early, rush through a quick coffee that barely touches the sides, scroll through headlines they won't remember, then step into a day that already feels like it's chasing them. There's no pause, no real intention, just reaction. One thing after another. And by the time they sit down at night, shoes kicked off, TV humming in the background, there's this low, persistent weight in their chest. Not loud enough to panic them, just enough to remind them something's off. But they don't sit with it. They reach for distraction. Another episode, another scroll, another promise that tomorrow will be different. Tomorrow they'll get serious. Tomorrow they'll figure it out. And tomorrow keeps doing what tomorrow does best. It never shows up the way you imagined. Here's the part that stings a little if you really look at it. Most people aren't stuck because life is unfair, or because they don't have talent, or because the world forgot about them. They're stuck because they're breaking rules they don't even know exist. Not written rules, not the kind you learn in school or read in a book. I'm talking about the quiet mechanics underneath how progress actually works. The kind of things you only notice when you step back long enough to see the pattern. And most people never step back. They stay in motion, because stopping means you might have to admit you've been heading the wrong way for a long time. That's not an easy thing to swallow. So instead, they double down. They go faster, add more, try harder. It's like watching someone lost in a city, convinced the solution is to keep walking without ever checking the map. There's a certain pride in it too. You hear it in the way people talk. Man, I've been grinding non-stop. I barely slept this week. I've got so much on my plate right now. It sounds impressive, feels productive, but if you listen closely, there's something else underneath it, a kind of quiet desperation. Because deep down, they're hoping all that effort will eventually pay off. That somewhere along the line, the universe will notice how hard they've been trying and decide to reward them for it. But the universe doesn't work like that. Effort, by itself, doesn't mean much. Direction does. And that's the part people don't like to hear, because direction requires clarity, and clarity requires honesty. You have to ask yourself uncomfortable questions. What am I actually working toward? Not what sounds good, not what other people expect. What do I really want my life to look like? And then the harder one, does what I do every day move me even an inch closer to that? Most people avoid that question like it's a bill they don't want to open. Because once you see the gap, you can't unsee it. You realize that a lot of your effort isn't building anything. It's just maintaining a loop. Wake up, react, stay busy, feel tired, repeat. It's a system, and it's a system that works perfectly if the goal is to keep you exactly where you are. And here's the thing, this isn't about blaming people. Life does get complicated. Bills show up whether you're ready or not. Responsibilities pile on. You've got family, expectations, things that pull at your time from every direction. It's not like you wake up one day and decide, yeah, I'd like to feel stuck for the next 10 years. It happens gradually, a compromise here, a delay there. You tell yourself you'll get back to your real goals once things settle down. But things don't settle down. They just change shape. And before you know it, years have passed. You're more experienced, sure, maybe even more stable. But that feeling, that quiet sense that you're not where you're supposed to be, it's still there, maybe stronger now, and harder to ignore. That's when people start looking for answers. They look for motivation, for shortcuts, for something that can break the pattern without forcing them to rethink the pattern itself. But that's like trying to fix a leak by turning up the water pressure. It doesn't solve the problem, it just makes the mess happen faster. What actually changes things is simpler and harder. You stop. You look at your life like an outsider would. Strip away the excuses, strip away the noise, and you ask, if someone else lived exactly the way I live every day, would they end up where I want to be? That question cuts through everything, because it's not about intentions anymore. It's about trajectory, and trajectory doesn't care how busy you feel. It only cares about direction and consistency. You can work yourself to the bone, sacrifice sleep, push through stress, tell yourself you're doing everything you can, and still end up miles away from where you hope to be. Not because you didn't try, but because you aimed wrong. And that's the part nobody warns you about. No one pulls you aside early on and says, hey, effort is cheap if it's pointed in the wrong direction. They let you figure it out the long way, through frustration, through wasted time, through that slow realization that being tired isn't the same as being productive. And by the time most people start to see it clearly, they've already invested years into patterns that don't serve them. That's a hard thing to walk away from. So they don't. They adjust a little, tweak things around the edges, but the core stays the same. And the results stay the same too. So you get this strange loop where people feel like they're doing everything right, but nothing meaningful is changing. They're moving, but not advancing. And over time, that does something to you. It wears you down in a quiet way. Not dramatic, not obvious, just enough to make you doubt yourself a little more each year. You start to wonder if maybe this is just how it is. Maybe this is what life looks like for most people. You work, you stay busy, you get by, and that's it. But every now and then, something breaks that illusion. You see someone who moves differently. Not louder, not busier, just more precise. They don't seem rushed, but they get more done. They don't chase everything, but what they do pursue actually leads somewhere. And it makes you pause, because it doesn't match the model you've been following. That's usually the first crack in the system. The moment you realize that maybe, just maybe, it's not about doing more. It's about doing the right things, in the right way, for long enough. Simple idea, but it changes everything once it lands. The problem is, most people don't let it land. They hear it, nod, maybe even feel inspired for a moment, then go right back to their privuchki, their routines, their comfortable chaos. Because changing direction isn't just a decision, it's a process. It requires you to let go of things that feel productive but aren't. It asks you to slow down before you can speed up. And in a world that rewards constant motion, slowing down feels like falling behind. So people avoid it. They stay in motion. They keep telling themselves that if they just push a little harder, something will click. But pushing harder in the wrong direction doesn't get you closer. It just gets you there faster. And that's the part that hits people late. Sometimes too late. They look up one day and realize they've built a life around habits and choices that never actually pointed toward what they wanted. And now, changing course feels heavier, more complicated, but not impossible. Just more expensive in terms of time and energy, which is why it matters to see this early, to catch yourself while you're still in motion, before the pattern locks in too deep, to ask the uncomfortable question now, instead of years later when the answer carries more weight. Because at the end of the day, it's not about how busy you are. It's not about how tired you feel. It's not even about how hard you're trying. It's about whether your effort is aligned with the direction that actually leads somewhere you want to go. And if it's not, then all that motion, all that noise, all that effort, it's just keeping you exactly where you are. Daniel had this way of walking into the cafe like the day was already late, even when it wasn't. You could tell before he even opened the door. The pace, the slight tension in his shoulders, the way his eyes scanned the room not to enjoy it, but to measure it. Like he was calculating how fast he could get in, get his coffee, and get back to whatever invisible fire he believed he was putting out. He always chose the same seat, near the window but not too close, somewhere he could see the street without being part of it. Laptop out in seconds, phone face up, Notifications lighting up like a slot machine that never paid out but kept you hooked anyway. And every morning, it was the same order. Black coffee, no sugar, no hesitation. Like he didn't even taste it anymore, just fuel, just another thing to keep the engine running. I watched him for a while before we ever spoke. Not in a curious way, more like you notice a pattern without trying to. Humans are predictable like that. We repeat ourselves until something forces us not to. Daniel was a loop, a well-dressed, well-spoken loop. One of those guys who looked like he had it together if you didn't look too closely. Clean shoes, decent watch, the kind of laptop people associate with productivity. But if you sat long enough, you started to see the cracks. He wasn't working on one thing. He was juggling 5, maybe 10. Tabs open like a messy desk, emails half-written, spreadsheets he'd stare at, then abandon, videos playing in the background at 1.5 times speed, like he was trying to absorb knowledge faster than his life could apply it. It wasn't learning, it was consumption disguised as progress. One morning, he dropped into the seat across from me without asking. Not rude, just distracted. Like the world was a waiting room, and everyone in it was temporary. He let out a breath, ran a hand through his hair and said, "Man, I swear I'm doing everything right, but nothing's moving." That line again. Different face, same sentence. I didn't answer right away, just took a sip of my coffee. Let the silence sit for a second longer than most people are comfortable with. He filled it, of course. People always do. "I've got this marketing thing I'm building," he said, tapping his laptop. "Plus, I'm trading on the side. And I started this fitness page last month, growing pretty fast, actually. And there's this app idea I've been sketching out. I don't know which one's gonna hit, you know?" I nodded. Not because I agreed, but because I understood the pattern. He wasn't building 4 things. He was avoiding committing to one. There's a difference, a big one. "So you're waiting to see which one works," I said. He leaned back a little, like I'd summarized something important. "Exactly. I don't want to waste time going all in on the wrong thing." That's when I almost smiled. Not because it was funny, because it was familiar. That logic sounds smart on the surface. Play multiple angles, stay flexible, keep your options open. But what it really does is protect you from the discomfort of depth. Because going deep on one path means facing the possibility that it might not work. And if it doesn't, you can't blame the strategy. You have to look at yourself. Spreading yourself thin gives you an excuse. "I didn't fail," you tell yourself. "I just didn't focus on it enough." It's a soft landing, too soft. Daniel kept talking, words spilling out faster than his thoughts could organize them. You could hear the urgency in it, the need for something to click. "I mean, I'm working all day," he said. "I wake up early, I stay up late, I'm constantly doing something. I just need one thing to take off." There it was again. That belief that success is hiding just around the corner, waiting for the right combination of effort and timing, like a slot machine. Pull the lever enough times, eventually you win. But life's not a casino. It doesn't reward randomness, it rewards alignment. And Daniel, he wasn't aligned with anything. He was scattered. I asked him a simple question. "If I looked at your last 30 days, could I tell what you're trying to become?" He paused, not long, but long enough to matter. His eyes shifted just a bit. "What do you mean?" "I mean," I said, "if someone followed you around for a month, watched what you worked on, what you prioritized, what you ignored, would it be obvious where you're headed?" He didn't answer right away this time. He looked at his screen, then at his phone, like the answer might be hiding in one of them. It wasn't. "I guess, not really," he admitted. And that was the most honest thing he said that morning. Because direction isn't what you say you want. It's what your actions point toward, consistently. And Daniel's actions, they pointed everywhere and nowhere at the same time. Over the next few weeks, we talked more. Not every day, just enough to see the pattern clearly. He'd come in with a new idea, a new angle, a new burst of energy. "I think this is it," he'd say. "This one feels right." And for a few days, maybe a week, he'd go all in. You could see it. More focused, less distracted, a hint of momentum building. And then, something would pull him away. A new opportunity, a new trend, a video he watched that made another path look easier, faster, more promising. And just like that, he'd pivot, again. It wasn't lack of discipline. He could work hard, I saw that. It was lack of commitment to a single direction long enough for anything to compound. That's the part people underestimate. Progress doesn't show up immediately. It accumulates, quietly, beneath the surface. Like interest in a bank account you don't check often enough. But if you keep withdrawing, switching paths, resetting your efforts, you never give it time to grow. You stay at zero, or close enough that it feels the same. One afternoon, he came in later than usual. No rush this time, just tired. Not the kind of tired sleep fixes, the kind that comes from spinning your wheels for too long. He sat down, didn't open his laptop right away, just stared at the table for a second. "I think I'm burning out," he said. I nodded. "From what?" He let out a short laugh. "That's the thing. I don't even know." Exactly. That's what scattered effort does. It drains you without building anything solid in return. You spend energy, but you don't see results. And that gap, it wears on you, slowly. "I feel like I'm always starting over," he added. That line stuck, because it was true. Every time he switched focus, he reset the clock. Back to beginner, back to zero momentum, back to that uncomfortable phase where nothing works yet and everything feels harder than it should. Most people can handle that phase once, maybe twice, but over and over, it breaks something. Not loudly, just enough to make you doubt whether you're capable of finishing anything at all. I leaned forward a bit. "What if the problem isn't that you haven't found the right thing?" I said. "What if the problem is you haven't stayed with anything long enough for it to work?" He didn't respond immediately, just sat there processing it. You could almost see the resistance, because accepting that idea means letting go of a comforting belief that the next thing will be the one that changes everything. It shifts the responsibility from the opportunity to the way you engage with it. "So what, I just pick one and ignore everything else?" he asked. There was a hint of skepticism in his voice, maybe even fear. "For a while," I said, "long enough to see what actually happens when you don't quit halfway through." He looked out the window. Cars passing, people walking, life moving at its usual pace. "That's risky," he said. I shrugged. "So is staying exactly where you are. That's the trade-off no one likes to admit. There's risk in focusing. You might choose wrong. You might invest time and not get the outcome you hoped for. But there's also risk in not focusing, a quieter one. You drift, you stay busy. You never find out what could have worked if you had just stayed with it. Most people choose the second risk because it feels safer, less final. But it's also less rewarding, because nothing meaningful comes from divided effort. The following days were different, not dramatically, just slightly more intentional. Daniel still showed up, still ordered the same coffee, but there was less noise around him, fewer tabs, fewer distractions. He picked one thing, the marketing project he'd been half committed to, and started treating it like it mattered. Not for a day, not for a burst of motivation, but consistently. You could see the discomfort in it, the urge to switch, the itch to chase something new. But he stayed, and that was new. Because for the first time, he wasn't just working, he was moving in a direction. And even though nothing had blown up yet, nothing had gone viral, nothing had made him a sudden success, there was something different in the way he carried himself. Less frantic, more grounded. Like he finally stopped trying to catch everything and started building something instead. The thing about change is, it doesn't announce itself. No drum roll, no clean before and after moment where everything suddenly makes sense. Most of the time, it slips in quietly, like a habit you didn't notice forming until one day you realize you've been doing things differently for a while now. With Daniel, it wasn't some dramatic turnaround. No big speech, no declaration that he had figured it all out. If anything, it looked underwhelming from the outside. Same cafe, same chair, same black coffee that had long stopped being about taste. But if you paid attention, and I mean really paid attention, the way you do when you're not just waiting for your turn to talk, you could see something had shifted. The noise around him had thinned out, not disappeared completely, but quieter, more controlled. His laptop screen wasn't a battlefield of tabs anymore. It held one thing, sometimes two, but they were connected, focused. Like he had finally drawn a line and decided, this is where I stand. It sounds simple when you say it like that, almost too simple. But most people never do it. They hover, they test. They dip their toes into 10 different directions and call it strategy. What Daniel did was choose. And choosing has consequences people don't like to talk about. Because the moment you choose one path, you're also rejecting 9 others. You're closing doors, and that triggers something in people. Fear, mostly. The kind that whispers, "What if you picked wrong?" That voice doesn't go away just because you decide to focus. If anything, it gets louder at first. I could see it in him during those early weeks. The way his eyes would flick to his phone when it buzzed, like he was resisting the urge to chase whatever new thing had just popped up. The way he'd pause sometimes, staring at the screen, not because he didn't know what to do, but because part of him was still wondering if he should be doing something else instead. That's the part nobody glamorizes. Focus isn't this clean, heroic act. It's messy. It's uncomfortable. It feels like you're missing out on something better, even when you're exactly where you need to be. One afternoon, I noticed him scrolling through something on his phone, slower than usual. Not the frantic swipe and refresh kind of scrolling. This was different, deliberate, like he was studying something he didn't quite trust. I leaned back, watching him for a second before saying anything. "What's got your attention?" He turned the screen slightly, enough for me to catch a glimpse. Some video, some guy talking about a faster way to make money online. Big claims, clean visuals, the kind of thing designed to make your current path feel slow and outdated. Daniel smirked, but it wasn't amused. It was aware. "This is what usually gets me," he said. "Every time I see something like this, I start thinking maybe I'm wasting time on the wrong thing." I nodded. "And what are you thinking now?" He locked the phone, set it face down on the table, and took a breath. "Now I'm thinking, this is exactly why I never get anywhere." That right there, that moment, that's the shift people don't see coming. It's not about discovering some new strategy or secret method. It's about recognizing the patterns that have been quietly sabotaging you and choosing not to follow them this time. Most people don't fail because they don't know what to do. They fail because they keep interrupting themselves. They plant a seed, water it for a few days, then dig it up to check if it's growing. When it's not, because of course it's not yet, they move on to a different seed, and then another, and another. After a while, they look around and wonder why nothing ever grows. Daniel had been doing that for years. He just didn't see it that way before. In his mind, he was being adaptable, smart, open to opportunity. But in reality, he was resetting his progress over and over again, starting from scratch so many times that he never experienced what it felt like to be ahead, to have momentum. That's a strange feeling, by the way, when you first encounter it. Momentum doesn't feel like a sudden burst of success. It feels easier, like the work starts pushing back a little, like the effort you put in yesterday begins to carry over into today. But you only get there if you stop resetting the game. Weeks passed, then a couple of months. No dramatic breakthroughs, no viral moments, but something else was happening. The kind of progress you don't notice day to day, but can't ignore when you look back. Daniel's conversations changed, not just with me, but in general. He stopped talking about what if and started talking about what's next. That's a subtle shift, but it matters. What if lives in possibility. It's safe there, no commitment, no risk. What's next lives in reality. It assumes you're already on a path, already building something, and now you're just figuring out how to keep it moving. One evening, the cafe was quieter than usual. Rain tapping against the window, the kind that makes people slow down whether they want to or not. Daniel was there, of course, same seat. But this time, he didn't have his laptop open, just a notebook, pen in hand, writing. Not typing, writing. That caught my attention. Most people avoid that now. Too slow, too deliberate. He looked up when I sat down. "I've been thinking," he said. "That's new," I replied, half smiling. He laughed, shook his head. "No, I mean, really thinking, not reacting, not chasing the next thing, just trying to understand what actually works." I leaned back, letting him continue. "All this time, I thought success was about finding the right opportunity," he said. "Like there was some perfect path out there, and I just had to discover it before anyone else did." He paused, tapping the pen lightly against the notebook. "But I don't think that's it anymore." "What is it then?" I asked. He looked at the page for a second, then back at me. "I think it's about staying long enough for something to work. Simple sentence, easy to overlook, but there's weight in it if you've ever spent years jumping from one thing to another. Because it challenges a belief most people carry without questioning, that success comes from choosing the perfect path. The reality is, there is no perfect path. There are only paths you commit to long enough to make them work. That's the twist. The part that makes people stop and rethink everything they've been doing. Because if that's true, if success is less about the opportunity and more about the consistency you bring to it, then a lot of the excuses fall apart. You can't keep blaming the market, the timing, the competition. You have to look at your own behavior, your own patterns. That's uncomfortable, but it's also where your power is. Daniel closed the notebook, like he'd said what he needed to say. It's weird, he added. Nothing's really changed on the outside. Same work, same routine, but it feels different. Because it is, I said. You're not starting over anymore. He nodded slowly. Yeah, that's it. There was a silence after that. Not awkward, just settled. The kind of silence that doesn't need to be filled. Outside, the rain kept falling. People rushed past the window, heads down, trying to get somewhere faster. Inside, everything felt a little slower, a little clearer. And that's when it really hit me. Not just about Daniel, but about people in general. We spend so much time looking for new information, new strategies, new ways to get ahead, when the real shift comes from seeing the same things differently, from understanding that the problem was never a lack of options. It was the way we kept abandoning them too early. That's the part no one sells you. There's no course, no flashy video, no shortcut that makes that realization comfortable. It's something you arrive at after enough false starts, enough frustration, enough time spent wondering why nothing sticks. And when it finally clicks, it's almost disappointing in its simplicity. Stay, focus, repeat. Not exciting, not glamorous, but effective. Daniel didn't become a different person overnight. He didn't suddenly transform into some hyper-disciplined machine. He still had moments of doubt, still had days where the work felt heavy, where progress seemed slow. But the difference was, he didn't interpret those moments as signals to quit anymore. He saw them for what they were, part of the process. And that changes everything. Because once you stop seeing discomfort as a warning sign and start seeing it as a normal part of building something, you stop running from it. You stay. And when you stay, things start to move. Not all at once. Not in a way that impresses other people right away, but in a way that matters, in a way that compounds. And that's the reality most people never give themselves a chance to experience. Not because they can't, but because they don't stay long enough to see it. There's a moment that comes, usually when things go quiet, when you're not distracted enough to ignore yourself anymore. And it's not loud or dramatic. It doesn't hit like some movie scene where everything suddenly makes sense. It's softer than that, almost uncomfortable in how ordinary it feels. Like sitting alone with a cup of coffee that's gone cold because you forgot to drink it, and realizing you've been running for so long, you don't even remember what it feels like to stand still without guilt. And that's where Daniel found himself one night, long after the cafe had emptied out, long after the noise of the day had burned off, and left behind that low hum of thoughts people usually try to outrun. He was still there, notebook open, pen resting between his fingers, not writing, just staring at a page that didn't need more words. It needed honesty, the kind you can't fake because there's no one else around to convince. And I could tell something in him had slowed down. Not in a lazy way, not in a defeated way, but in that rare way where a person finally stops negotiating with reality and starts looking at it directly. No filters, no shortcuts, just the truth sitting there like an unpaid bill you can't ignore anymore. And he spoke without looking up, voice quieter than usual, like he wasn't trying to impress anyone, not even himself. "You know what's strange?" he said, and I didn't answer. I just let him keep going. Because when people reach that point, interruption ruins it. "I used to think I was tired because I was doing too much," he said. "But that wasn't it." He paused, exhaled slowly. "I was tired because none of it meant anything yet." And that sentence stayed in the air for a second, heavy in a way that didn't need explanation. Because anyone who's been there knows exactly what he meant. There's a difference between being physically exhausted and being drained in a way sleep doesn't fix. The kind that comes from putting energy into things that don't give anything back. Not because they can't, but because you never stay long enough for them to. And that's the part people rarely admit. We blame the workload, the schedule, the pressure. But underneath all of it, there's this quiet frustration that builds when effort doesn't translate into progress. When days blur together, and you can't point to anything solid and say, "This is moving." And Daniel had been living in that space for years without naming it, just feeling it in the background like static. And now that he had slowed down enough to see it clearly, it wasn't comfortable. It wasn't some inspiring realization. It was raw, like peeling back something you've been covering up for too long. And he leaned forward, elbows on the table, rubbing his hands together like he was trying to warm them up, even though the room wasn't cold. "I kept telling myself I just needed one win," he said. "One break, one thing to finally work. But I never asked if I was even giving anything a real chance." And there it was again, that pattern. But this time he wasn't defending it. He was dissecting it, pulling it apart piece by piece like someone trying to understand why a machine they've been using for years never actually produced what it promised. And the deeper he went, the quieter he got. Not because he was running out of things to say, but because he was finally saying things he hadn't let himself think before. "I think I was scared," he admitted, almost under his breath. And that word, scared, it's one people don't like to use in this context. They dress it up as strategy, flexibility, staying open to opportunity. But strip all that away, and what you're left with is fear. Fear of committing and being wrong. Fear of investing time and not seeing a return. Fear of reaching the point where you can't blame anything else if it doesn't work. And the strange thing is, that fear doesn't stop people from working hard. It just redirects that effort into safer patterns. Patterns that feel productive but don't require full exposure. And Daniel had lived inside those patterns so long they felt normal. Until now, sitting there with nothing to distract him, he could see them for what they were. And it didn't make him feel strong. It made him feel honest, which is a different kind of strength. Quieter, less visible, but more real. And he finally looked up, eyes a little heavier than usual. Not from lack of sleep, but from carrying the weight of seeing things clearly. "I don't think I've ever really finished anything," he said. And that line, it didn't come with drama, no self-pity, just a simple statement, like he was reading it off a list. And that's what made it hit harder. Because finishing something, truly finishing, not abandoning it halfway, not pivoting when it gets uncomfortable, but staying until it either works or you've pushed it as far as it can go. That's where confidence actually comes from. Not from starting, not from trying, but from seeing something through to the end. And without that experience, you're always guessing, always wondering if you're capable, always looking for the next thing to prove it. And that loop, it keeps people stuck longer than they realize. Not because they lack ability, but because they've never stayed in one place long enough to see what their ability can actually produce. And Daniel was sitting right in the middle of that realization, not trying to escape it this time, just letting it settle, letting it be uncomfortable. Because that's what it is before it turns into something useful, discomfort, the kind that slows you down, makes you question things you've been running on autopilot. And for a while, neither of us said anything. The cafe lights dimmed slightly as the staff started closing up, chairs being stacked, the quiet signals that the day was ending, whether you were ready or not. And Daniel just sat there, hands still, no phone, no laptop, no noise. And you could see it in his posture. Something had shifted again, not in a way that would impress anyone scrolling past him, but in a way that would matter months from now, maybe years. Because this is the part where most people turn away, where they reach for distraction, for something to lighten the weight of what they're seeing. But he didn't. He stayed with it. And that's rare. Rarer than talent, rarer than opportunity. The ability to sit with the truth of your situation without immediately trying to escape it. And when he finally spoke again, his voice was steadier, not louder, just more grounded. "I think I get it now," he said. "It's not that I didn't have time or energy or even good ideas. It's that I never gave anything the space to grow." And he tapped the notebook lightly, like he was marking the thought. "I kept interrupting the process." And that phrase, interrupting the process, it sounds simple, but it explains so much of why people feel stuck. Because growth, real growth, doesn't respond well to interruption. It needs continuity. It needs repetition. It needs those boring, uneventful days where nothing seems to change but something is quietly building underneath. And when you keep breaking that chain, you never reach the point where things start working in your favor. You stay at the beginning, over and over again. And that's exhausting in a way most people can't quite explain. because it looks like effort from the outside, but it feels like stagnation on the inside. And Daniel had finally connected those dots, not intellectually, but experientially. He felt it now, in the way his past choices lined up, in the way his current approach felt different, and more importantly, in the way he was willing to keep going, even without immediate results. And that's where the shift deepens, not in the decision to focus, but in the willingness to endure the quiet phase, the phase where nothing validates you, where no one notices, where it would be easy to assume you're wasting your time again, and still choosing to stay, not because you're certain it will work, but because you understand that leaving guarantees it won't. And that kind of thinking, it doesn't come from motivation, it comes from clarity, the kind you earn by facing your own patterns without flinching. And as we stood up to leave, the chairs now stacked, the lights dimmed further, the last traces of the day fading out, Daniel didn't rush, didn't check his phone, didn't look like he was chasing anything anymore. And that was new, not dramatic, not something you'd post about, just a quiet steadiness, like someone who finally stopped running long enough to see where they actually are, and for the first time, wasn't immediately trying to be somewhere else. And that's where everything starts to change, not when life gets easier, not when opportunities suddenly line up, but when you stop fighting the process long enough to let it work, and accept that the discomfort you've been avoiding isn't a sign you're doing something wrong. It's a sign you're finally doing something real. By the time things started to look different for Daniel, nobody clapped. Nobody leaned over and said, "Hey, I see the progress." There was no moment where the room paused and acknowledged that something meaningful had taken place. And that's the part people don't prepare you for, the silence that surrounds real change. Because we're so used to associating progress with noise, with visible wins, with numbers going up or people paying attention. But most of the shifts that actually alter the direction of your life happen quietly, almost privately, in ways that don't translate well into a highlight reel. And if you're not paying attention, you'll miss them. You'll dismiss them as nothing, and go back to chasing something louder, something easier to measure. But Daniel didn't do that this time. He stayed with the quiet, and over weeks, then months, you could see the difference not in what he said, but in what he stopped saying. He didn't talk about the next big idea anymore. Didn't bring up some new strategy he found at 2 a.m. Didn't bounce between excitement and frustration like he used to. Instead, there was this steady, almost boring consistency to him, like a man who wakes up, does what he said he would do, and goes to sleep without needing to convince himself it was enough. And if you've never lived like that, it sounds unimpressive. But if you have, you know how rare it is. Because most people live in extremes, either pushing too hard in short bursts or not pushing at all. But very few find that middle ground, where effort becomes part of their identity instead of something they negotiate with every day. And that's where Daniel landed, not perfectly, not without moments of doubt, but consistently enough that things began to stack in a way they never had before. And one evening, as the light outside softened into that dull orange that makes everything look a little slower than it actually is, he sat across from me, same seat, same coffee, but there was something else there now, something you don't see often, a kind of quiet confidence that doesn't need to announce itself. And he said, almost casually, "I landed my first real client. No excitement, no over-celebration, just a statement, like he was reporting the weather." And I nodded, not because it was small, but because I understood what it represented. It wasn't just a client, it was proof. Proof that staying had started to pay off, that the time he invested without immediate return hadn't disappeared. It had been building something under the surface, and now it was beginning to show. And that's how it works. Not all at once, not in a way that justifies every moment of doubt immediately, but enough to shift your belief, enough to make you realize that the process you committed to is capable of producing results if you let it run long enough. And Daniel leaned back, looking out the window for a second before continuing. "It's weird," he said. "A few months ago, I would have thought this meant I made it." He smiled slightly, not in a proud way, more like someone recognizing an old version of themselves. Now it just feels like part of the process. And that right there, that shift in perception, is where things really change. Because when you stop treating small wins like final destinations and start seeing them as checkpoints, you remove the pressure to have everything figured out at once. You stop swinging between extremes of excitement and disappointment, and you settle into something more sustainable. something that doesn't rely on constant validation to keep going. And that's what allows progress to continue without interruption, because you're no longer chasing a feeling, you're building a system. And systems don't need motivation the way emotions do. They just need consistency. And over time, that consistency compounds into something that looks like success from the outside, but feels like normal life from the inside. And Daniel was starting to live in that space. Not fully, not permanently, but enough to understand what it felt like. And once you experience that, it's hard to go back to the chaos, because you realize how much energy you were wasting before, how much time slipped through your hands while you were busy convincing yourself you were making progress. And we sat there for a while, not rushing the conversation, letting it unfold the way real conversations do when neither person is trying to prove anything. And I asked him something I already knew the answer to. So what changed? He didn't respond immediately, just turned the cup slowly in his hands, like he was aligning the thought before speaking. I stopped looking for shortcuts, he said finally. Not just in what I do, but in how I think. He glanced up, eyes steady. I realized I was always trying to skip the part where things are slow, where nothing is guaranteed, where you just have to keep going without knowing if it'll work. He paused, then added, and that's the part that actually matters. And there it was, laid out in a way that doesn't need decoration. Because it's true in a way you can feel if you've ever tried to build something real. The part everyone tries to avoid is the part that determines everything. The repetition, the uncertainty, the lack of immediate reward. That's where most people quit, not because they can't continue, but because they expected something different, something faster, something easier to validate. And when they don't get it, they assume they're on the wrong path, when in reality, they've just reached the point where the path starts demanding something from them. And Daniel had crossed that point and decided to stay. And that decision, repeated over days and weeks, had started to reshape his reality. Not overnight, not in a way that would impress anyone looking for instant transformation, but in a way that would hold, that wouldn't collapse the moment things got difficult again. And that's what most people are missing, not opportunity, not information, but the willingness to stay in the process long enough for it to become something. And as the conversation drifted, as the evening settled into that quiet rhythm where the world feels a little less urgent, I found myself thinking about how many people never reach this point. Not because they're incapable, but because they don't give themselves the chance. They keep moving, keep switching, keep looking for something that feels right immediately. And in doing so, they miss the only thing that actually works. And I looked at Daniel, then back out at the street where people were still rushing past, phones in hand, minds somewhere else, chasing something they hadn't clearly defined. And I said, more to the moment than to him, most people don't fail because they can't do it, I said. They fail because they don't stay. He nodded, not like he was hearing it for the first time, but like he recognized it now, like it matched something he had already seen in himself. And that's the difference between hearing advice and understanding it. One passes through you, the other settles, changes how you see things moving forward. And we stood up after a while, the cafe nearly empty again, chairs half stacked, the day folding into night. And as we stepped outside, the air carried that familiar mix of city noise and quiet moments in between. And before we went our separate ways, Daniel said something that lingered longer than he probably intended. I used to think I needed something new to change my life, he said. Turns out, I just needed to stop interrupting what I already started. And that's where it lands, not as a dramatic conclusion, not as some perfect lesson wrapped in a clean sentence, but as a simple observation that carries more weight the longer you sit with it. Because if you strip away everything else, the noise, the distractions, the endless search for better options, what you're left with is a question that doesn't let you hide behind effort or intention. Are you actually moving towards something, or are you just staying busy enough to avoid noticing that you're not? And if you're honest about that, really honest, you don't need 10 new strategies or another burst of motivation. You need to choose a direction, remove what doesn't serve it, and stay long enough to see it through. And that's not a comfortable path. It won't give you constant reassurance. It won't always feel like progress, but it will move you forward in a way that nothing else does. And if you're still here, still listening, still willing to sit with something that doesn't promise instant results, then maybe you already feel that. Maybe you're at that point where the noise isn't satisfying anymore, where you're starting to question the patterns you've been running on. And if that's the case, then don't rush away from it. Don't look for the next distraction to soften it. Stay with it. Let it shape how you move from here. And if you want to keep exploring that path, to keep peeling back the layers most people avoid, then stick around. Not because there's a secret waiting for you, but because sometimes you just need someone to sit across the table and remind you of what already matters.